Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the messy sprawl of information and hand you back the essential, compelling core. Today, we are cracking open a case file that deliberately throws the traditional mystery rulebook straight into the fire. It presents us with a challenge that is far more intellectual than material.
That's absolutely right. Our sources today are drawn entirely from the classic Agatha Christie novel, Cards on the Table. And what we have here is not just a murder mystery. I mean, it is a masterclass in behavioral science disguised as fiction.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're going to explore a mystery where the deduction must be explicitly, entirely psychological. This isn't about finding a misplaced pipe cleaner or, tracing a footprint in the mud.
Not at all. Or testing for some rare, obscure poison. This is all about analyzing temperament, reading bridge scores, and then connecting those behavioral patterns to a criminal past. We're literally trying to read the criminal mind.
It's such a bold experiment on Christie's part. She essentially pulls back the curtain in her foreword and warns you, the reader, against the usual expectations.
She does. She flat out tells you that there are only 4 suspects, 4 starters, as she puts it, and that any one of them might be the murderer. The whole element of surprise, that standard trope of the least likely person,
Right.
it's intentionally minimized from the very first page.
That is such a fascinating constraint because if you take away the surprise, what do you replace it with?
Well, the narrative focus shifts entirely onto what Christie calls the 4 widely divergent types. Each one has a unique personality, a different motive, and a different historical method of crime. So it transforms the book from a simple whodunit into, well, a complex study of human consistency. Or inconsistency, I suppose.
Exactly. You're asked to decide. Is a murderer's nature so ingrained that their method has to match their personality? Does an arrogant risk-taker always choose a bold crime? And does a timid planner always go for the safe option?
Precisely. It's a philosophical question, really. It's about free will versus innate character, and it's all played out across a bridge table.
It's so focused on this internal debate that the source material itself notes the dramatic difference in opinion between the 2 great fictional detectives. You've got Hercule Poirot, who just loves pure intellect.
He thought this case was one of his absolute favorites, a true test of the little gray cells, as he'd say.
Right. But then his friend, Captain Hastings, a very traditionalist Captain Hastings, he thought the whole thing was very dull.
Yeah, Hastings wanted the material clues, the romantic chase, the thrill of the unexpected reveal. Poirot, on the other hand, he relished the intellectual rigor of having to build the entire case from just 4 personality profiles.
And so that's our mission today. We're going to dive so deeply into that psychology that we can prove unequivocally that Poirot was right and that the cards laid on this table are anything but dull. So before we even get to the murder, we have to spend a good bit of time meeting the man whose obsession made this whole thing possible, the victim, Mr. Shaitana. Because the crime is entirely born from his peculiar and deeply morbid vanity.
Mr. Shaitana is, he's instantly recognizable. The sources describe him as tall, thin, and melancholy. But it's a very deliberate effect. He worked hard to achieve a Mephistophelian look. He's theatrical in the absolute worst way.
They really paint that picture with immense details, don't they? It's to make sure you feel that immediate repulsion that most characters felt. He had heavily accented, jet black eyebrows, a thin, waxed mustache, and a small black imperial beard.
And his clothes were these exquisite works of art, meticulously chosen, but also just fundamentally bizarre. The narrative notes that he was the kind of person every healthy Englishman longed fervently to kick. They often called him that damned Dago.
And despite all that public disdain and the private fear he inspired, everyone still went to his parties.
Of course they did. He was enormously wealthy, living in this stunning flat in Park Lane, and he threw marvelous, often decidedly macabre social gatherings. But the fear, that all stemmed from one key factor. There was this pervasive general feeling that Shaitana knew a little too much about everybody.
This is where his true nature as a collector comes into focus, right? He explains his hobby to Poirot at an exhibition, and the irony is, it's an exhibition of snuff boxes.
It is. Poirot sees the fine detail of the snuff boxes and asks if Shaitana collects objects related to crime, and Shaitana just dismisses it all. Relics, trinkets, not interested.
He says, and this is really the core motivation of the entire plot, that he collects only the best objects of their kind, and his ultimate collection.
The human beings who commit them, Poirot. He has zero interest in failures or criminals who got caught by the police. He specifically collects, and I'm quoting here, the ones who have got away with it, the successes. The individuals who committed murder and then just returned to live agreeable, respected lives, completely untouched by suspicion.
He saw himself as this high art connoisseur of crime. He even argued that a truly successful, uncatchable murderer should be celebrated. He said they should be granted a pension out of the public funds and asked out to dinner.
It's an insane narcissistic philosophy. It makes him view these criminals as just, well, exhibits in his private museum.
And that morbid vanity leads directly to the dinner invitation. He proposes to host a dinner for his collection of exhibits. 4 alleged murderers whom he's identified, and 4 sleuths, 4 experts in detection who would unknowingly dine with them. It was his ultimate game.
His final flourish of social engineering. And when he presents this idea to Poirot, the famous detective sees the profound danger immediately. He tells Shaitana, "I can admire a tiger, but I will admire him from outside his cage. I will not go inside."
It's a very pointed comment. He recognizes the difference between appreciation and participation.
And then he delivers the grave warning that directly seals Shaitana's fate. He says, "I fancy, Mr. Shaitana, that your hobby might be a dangerous one." Shaitana, just embodying that Mephistophelian role to the very end, he just laughs. He accepts the possibility of death as the ultimate thrill, the apex of his perverse collection.
So we arrive at the dinner party itself. And it's a perfect piece of structural engineering by Christie. 8 people sit down, 4 hunters and 4 alleged hunted. We have to first establish who these 8 players are, because their personalities are the only real evidence we're going to get.
And the 4 investigators, the sleuths, they were intentionally a very high-powered, diverse group. They were designed to bring all facets of professional detection to bear on the problem, if, they'd known what the problem was going to be.
First, naturally, is Hercule Poirot, the private detective, master of psychology and logic. He's paired with Superintendent Battle, who represents the solid, authoritative machinery of Scotland Yard.
Right. Battle is described as big, square, and wooden-faced, conveying this impression of being carved out of battleship timber. But we're assured this exterior hides a quick, astute mind. He's the grounding element in the group.
Third, we have Colonel Race, the man of action and global intelligence. He's described as a dark, handsome, bronzed man of 50. His specialty is Secret Service activities, and he's usually found in some volatile global outpost tracking international threats.
He brings that perspective of high-stakes, real-world danger. And then finally, you have the most colorful member of the group, Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, the novelist.
Yes, famous for her sensational detective stories, especially her detective, Sven Hedgerson, who she constantly complains about. She's a self-described hot-headed feminist and is known for constantly experimenting with her large quantity of rebellious gray hair. At this dinner, she was wearing a fringe.
And she provides the intuition, the sometimes erratic perspective of the creative mind. She openly prefers untraceable poisons and believes fiercely in a woman's intuition over, hard forensic evidence.
So those 4 are the hunters. The other 4 are the exhibits the suspects Shaitana believes have committed murder and are now dining with him. And we have to pay very close attention to these first impressions, because they are the foundation of Poirot's entire case.
We start with Dr. Roberts. He's a parody almost of a cheerful, middle-aged medical practitioner. He has small, twinkling eyes, a tendency to embonpoint, a comfortable stoutness. His manner is genial, brisk, and highly confident.
You get the immediate sense he delivered an agreeable diagnosis, the kind of doctor who inspires total trust.
Exactly. Next, Mrs. Lorrimer. She's a well-dressed, intelligent-looking woman of about 60. Finely cut features, a clear, incisive voice. We learn almost instantly that she is a known first-class bridge player. She just projects competence, intelligence, and restraint.
Then Major Despard. He's tall, lean, and handsome. A man of action, though his face is slightly marred by a distinctive scar on his temple. He naturally gravitates toward Colonel Race, and they bond instantly over shared tales of sport and expeditions in the wilds. So he's established as physically capable, disciplined, adventurous.
And the last suspect is Anne Meredith. She's a pretty girl in her early 20s, medium height, and she's immediately described as nervous, cautious, and rather ordinary. She only knows Shaitana slightly and is clearly out of her depth in this company.
She even confesses to Poirot that she finds crime not terribly interesting and thinks Shaitana is a shivery kind of man.
Yeah, she's uncomfortable. And the dinner conversation itself is a key part of this psychological setup. Shaitana, the devilish host, ensures the discussion revolves entirely around methods of murder.
He pointedly mentions poison, which he calls a woman's weapon, a doctor's unique opportunities for murder, and the ease of staging domestic or shooting accidents. I mean, the conversation is so clearly aimed at warning, threatening, and psychologically pressing his guests.
It creates this almost unbearable atmosphere of explicit dread. And the suspects are forced to participate in a discussion about their own potential crimes. As Poirot later realizes, Shaitana was, in effect, signing his own death warrant with those pointed remarks. Because at least one person at that table realized the dinner wasn't a game, it was a final, carefully orchestrated moment of confrontation, and they panicked.
After the exquisite but incredibly tense dinner, the group separates for the game that gives the book its name, Bridge. And this setup is crucial, because it is designed to maximize opportunity while minimizing suspicion.
The setting is perfectly engineered for secret violence. The 8 guests split into 2 tables. The 4 suspects, Roberts, Lorrimer, Despard, and Meredith, they play in the firelit drawing room. The 4 sleuths, Poirot, Battle, Race, and Oliver, play in a separate smoking room, totally insulated from what's about to happen.
In Shaitana, the non-player, he sits alone in a deep, big chair by the fireplace in the suspect's room. The lighting is low, relying mostly on the subdued glow of the fire. The only slightly stronger light shines directly over the bridge table itself,
Which ensures intense, almost tunnel vision focus on the game. It renders the players basically blind to anything not directly related to their hand of cards.
The intensity of the game is essential here. When the 4 sleuths finally return, ready to say goodnight, they find Shaitana dead. He's sitting with his head fallen forward, stabbed once efficiently. The weapon is a long, thin, stiletto-like trinket with a small, round, jeweled head, which was just lying nearby on an ornamental table.
Superintendent Battle immediately takes charge, and his initial deduction is brilliant. It immediately narrows the scope. He says the killer must have been the dummy at the bridge table.
Let's break that down because it's such a sound deduction. In bridge, the dummy player lays down their hand and is temporarily inactive.
Right, leaving them free to observe or, well, move about without disrupting the focus of the other 3 players who are concentrating intensely on the game. To commit such a sudden, brazen act, stabbing in a small room with 3 other people, requires incredible nerve, but the opportunity only really arises when you're released from the concentration of the game itself.
So the killer had a guaranteed window of time when they were free to move without drawing suspicion, as long as they didn't take too long. This high-risk context immediately aligns with the psychological profiles Shaitana was hinting at.
Now we have to map the factual evidence, which is, as you'd expect, pretty vague because everyone was focused on the cards. We can track the movements of the 4 suspects, though.
Okay, so Dr. Roberts admitted to getting up 3 times while he was dummy. He stoked the fire, fetched drinks for the table, and got a whiskey for himself. Each time, he passed directly near Shaitana's chair.
Major Despard got up twice. Once to fetch an ashtray, the second time to get a drink and poke the fire.
Mrs. Lorrimer only got up once. And crucially, she went to poke the fire and actually spoke to Shaitana. She confirms he was alive at that point, about an hour into the game, so that narrows the window of opportunity.
It does. And finally, Anne Meredith left the table once, or, as the sources put it, she wandered about the room a bit. But nobody was paying precise attention to her movements near the fireplace. The critical window for the murder falls between Mrs. Lorrimer seeing him alive and the sleuths discovering the body well over an hour later. The one concrete fact they have is that the crime was opportunistic and required a big risk.
And this is the definitive turning point in the case, isn't it? This is where Poirot throws out the usual police methodology. He says effectively, give me the bridge scores. He's not looking for fingerprints or ballistic reports. He's looking for the hallmark of a past crime revealed through the temperament exhibited while playing a high-stakes but non-criminal game. Okay, now we execute the deep dive into the 4 exhibits. This is where the deduction becomes, as we said, entirely psychological, connecting playing styles to criminal personalities. We have to link their bridge profile, their conduct under pressure, to the specific types of murders they may have committed in the past.
Well, Poirot's genius is taking a seemingly irrelevant detail, how a person bids or plays cards, and treating it as an open window into their subconscious decision-making process. The bridge table becomes a miniature representation of life. It shows whether they are cautious, bold, methodical, or erratic.
Let's begin with Dr. Roberts, the audacious bluffer. He arrived with that air of confidence, the genial, highly colored man who cheerfully admitted to Battle that he was dummy and passed near Shaitana 3 times.
His bridge profile is just damningly consistent with his cheerful exterior. Mrs. Lorrimer, the superior player, noted that Roberts often overcalls his hand. That is, he bids higher than his cards actually justify, relying on nerve and flair to trick the opponents and somehow pull off an improbable success.
So Poirot interprets this as showing Complete confidence in his own powers to pull off a risky thing. He's an arrogant, high-stakes gambler no matter the context.
And when he's questioned about the hands they played, he remembered virtually none of the scores, which suggests his concentration was entirely elsewhere, focused on the murder opportunity, not the details of the game. He was just waiting for his moment.
The police investigation into his past, spearheaded by Superintendent Battle and assisted by Sergeant O'Connor, the charming officer known for extracting information through polite gossip.
Ah yes, nicknamed the maidservant's prayer. He confirmed Shaitana's suspicion through not one, but two previous victims.
First, a Mr. Craddock. Craddock died mysteriously of anthrax from an infected shaving brush. This is a public scandal at the time, but the key fact is that Roberts was Craddock's doctor. The two men had just had a furious argument over Craddock accusing Roberts of unprofessional conduct regarding his wife.
And O'Connor's investigation subtly revealed that Roberts, after that argument, washed his hands in the dressing room where the shaving gear was located. The implication is just terrifying. A public murder marked by a known external scandal with the infected brush, but committed quite openly in the sight of the world. Perfectly timed to resolve a personal threat.
But Roberts wasn't satisfied with silencing the husband.
No. The second victim was Mrs. Craddock. She died shortly afterward while traveling in Egypt of an obscure blood poisoning. She had received a routine typhoid inoculation from Roberts just before she left. The sources note that this specific germ might have been introduced then, covered by a routine medical procedure.
So we have a clear psychological pattern emerging. Roberts' past crimes were medically veiled, highly calculated, and high risk, high reward. He used germs or poison to simulate natural death, relying on sheer audacity and the authority of his profession to obscure the truth. He's the master of the public murder.
Here's the critical point, and the challenge we have to address. Why would such a precise medical murderer suddenly choose an impulsive brute force stabbing with a random stiletto? I mean, doesn't that break the psychological pattern entirely?
That's the exact question Poirot had to answer. On the surface, it seems inconsistent.
But Poirot argues that the nature of the crime, the boldness, seizing an opportunity in a room full of people, relying on bluff, remains perfectly consistent with his arrogance, even if the weapon changes. The act of stabbing Shaitana in front of witnesses is simply the ultimate expression of his risk-taking temperament. He panicked when Shaitana's comments revealed he'd been identified, and he seized the nearest weapon to make the problem disappear quickly.
So Roberts remembered none of the bridge hands because his mind was entirely focused on that audacious plan. That confirms him as a killer, and a highly dangerous one.
Okay, moving on to Anne Meredith, the timid kleptomaniac. She is the cautious, nervous girl who confessed to finding Shaitana frightening. Her temperament is the polar opposite of Roberts.
And her bridge profile reflected her nature exactly. She was judged a timid player, lacking confidence, cautious in her bidding, and interestingly, economical. She used the back of the scorecard to save paper. Poirot also noted her tendency to observe and comment on expensive objects, like the Egyptian jewelry in the room.
The investigation confirmed her past crime, linked to her employment at a place called Combecker. She was a companion to an elderly woman, Mrs. Benson, who died after accidentally drinking that paint, which had been carelessly stored in a syrup of figs bottle.
And the fact that Mrs. Benson herself suggested putting the paint in the old bottle made the death look like a classic domestic accident. It was caused by the elderly lady's own carelessness. And Anne did not gain financially from the death. She remained poor.
This is where Poirot links the timidity and the economy to the motive. He hypothesizes that Anne was a thief, a kleptomaniac, as suggested by her noticing the jewelry. Mrs. Benson must have discovered Anne's weak streak, prompting Anne to kill out of desperate, overwhelming fear of exposure.
And Poirot needed to prove this character flaw without arresting her. That's where the ingenious stocking trap comes in.
It's a brilliant piece of behavioral psychology. To test her character, Poirot left 19 pairs of expensive, delicate silk stockings priced at 37 and 6 pence a pair, a considerable sum at the time, openly displayed in his flat, and made sure Anne had privacy there. When he checked afterward, 2 pairs were missing.
This confirmed her pattern of irresistible petty theft. It validated the motive for the Benson murder. Anne was driven by desperate fear of exposure, not profit. Her past crime was a hopeful kind of murder, low risk, using a domestic context to stage an accident that was absolutely safe.
Therefore, the violent, audacious, high-risk stabbing of Shaitana in a room full of witnesses seems psychologically inconsistent with her panicked, low-risk nature. Like Roberts, she is a murderer, but this particular method just doesn't fit her pattern of crime.
Now for Major Despard, the man of honor. Despard is the cool, disciplined man who avoided pretense. His profile was that of a cautious, conventional bridge player, resourceful when necessary, but never prone to melodrama or bluffing.
Colonel Race's investigation turned up a highly sensitive rumor regarding a Professor Luxmore who died during a South American expedition with Despard. The rumor suggested Luxmore died of a bullet wound, not fever, as was officially reported. This was Shaitana's key suspicion.
Poirot's initial step here is fascinating. He deliberately approaches Mrs. Luxmore first, adopting a subtly, ornately foreign and Baroque manner, faintly imitating Shaitana's theatrical style, specifically to provoke her. And she gave him exactly what he expected. A highly dramatic, romanticized, and utterly false account of Despard shooting her husband in self-defense during a crime passionate over her.
Despard, upon hearing that Poirot had been speaking to the appalling woman, immediately sought out the detective to set the record straight. He provided the dry, factual truth.
Despard's true account revealed that Luxmore was delirious and staggering toward a dangerous river. Despard attempted to shoot at his leg to stop him, but Mrs. Luxmore, who was suffering from delusions that Despard was in love with her, grabbed his arm, jerking the shot into Luxmore's back, killing him accidentally. Despard agreed to conceal it as fever to spare the highly unstable woman, the public scandal, and the knowledge that she caused her husband's death.
And Poirot accepts Despard's version entirely. The man's cool, honorable, and disciplined character, his absolute lack of self-aggrandizement, contrasting with Mrs. Luxmore's melodrama, confirmed that he was not a murderer. He was a man willing to accept blame to shield a vulnerable person from the truth. This is the first major elimination based purely on psychological fitness, proving Shaitana was wrong about one of his exhibits.
Which leaves us, by process of elimination of the stiletto crime profile, with Mrs. Lorrimer, the logical planner. Poirot assessed her as having the best brain of the four, a true mathematical mind capable of planning a crime slowly and carefully, ensuring there would be no flaw.
Her bridge insight was extraordinary. Her marvelous card memory meant she could reconstruct nearly every hand played that evening, showing a power of concentration that would render her blind to her surroundings. This meant that even if a murder occurred right next to her, she would be oblivious to everything except the game. This concentration, while a talent, could be a psychological weakness that enabled the crime by others.
She was the key witness, providing the crucial detail. Dr. Roberts, her partner, had bid a grand slam unjustifiably, forcing her to play the hand while he was dummy. This strongly indicated Roberts had engineered the situation to free himself up.
And although she possessed the brain power for a perfect murder, Poirot felt she was the least likely to commit sudden, sloppy, spur-of-the-moment stabbing. She would prefer a clean, premeditated kill. However, with Despard cleared, and the stiletto attack being inconsistent with both Roberts's medical signature and Anne's panic denial, Lorrimer remained the last logical suspect on the board.
This brings us to the astonishing final act, which involves multiple layers of deception, all based on the psychological profiles we've just established. And it starts with the biggest red herring of the case, Mrs. Lorrimer's confession.
The day after Despard is effectively cleared, Lorrimer, the logical planner, summons Poirot and confesses to killing Shaitana. She claims it was a sudden, dire inspiration, a moment of genius that seized her when she saw the stiletto lying there.
But Poirot, using her own profile against her, immediately finds the story inconsistent. He gently tells her that he doesn't believe her, but that he believes she wishes him to. The meticulous Mrs. Lorrimer does not commit crimes based on dire inspiration. She plans.
Under Poirot's probing, the entire story cracks open. Lorrimer reveals that she is seriously ill, dying, and chose to confess to shield someone else. She claims she saw Anne Meredith bend over Shaitana, straighten up, and return to the table with a look of guilt and fear in her eyes. Lorrimer, mistaking Anne's characteristic timidity for the fear of a killer, decided to take the blame out of pity for the fragile girl, planning to die soon anyway.
This is a monumental twist. The logical planner uses her final days to perform an act of immense, if misguided, charity and protection. But before Poirot can fully digest or act on this staggering information, the second, more permanent twist lands.
Mrs. Lorrimer is found dead by overdose, seemingly confirming her guilt in a tragic suicide. It appears she confessed to Poirot, then took her own life to ensure justice was served, while simultaneously protecting Anne.
And who was the person who finds her body, retrieves the suicide note, and reports the confession immediately? Dr. Roberts. It was, Roberts assured everyone, an extremely neat and conclusive ending to the entire Shaitana affair.
But Poirot immediately smells a rat. It is too neat. The careful, meticulous Lorrimer committing suicide right after confessing, and the confession being instantly confirmed by the most obvious and available suspect, the pattern is too convenient.
Poirot digs deeper, relying on the details. He speaks to Lorrimer's parlor maid, who provides critical insights. First, the maid mentions that Anne Meredith visited Lorrimer after Poirot had left, and Lorrimer went straight to bed immediately afterward. This makes it highly unlikely she wrote the suicide note later that night.
Second, and most damningly, Lorrimer was found with a telltale, slightly bruised injection mark on her arm. This is the moment Poirot sees the full pattern. Roberts didn't just stumble upon the body, he staged the suicide. He seized the opportunity presented by Lorrimer's genuine illness and false confession.
Roberts had confessed to forging the suicide letters in triplicate to frame Lorrimer and secure his own freedom. He utilized Lorrimer's existing illness and the widespread acceptance of her confession to make the staging seamless.
And the method of this second murder instantly snaps back to Roberts's consistent psychological pattern, the use of medical methods to mask murder as a natural death or accident. Roberts injected Mrs. Lorrimer with Evipan, which is chemically known as N-methylcyclohexanol-methylmalonylurea.
Let's break down the chemistry for a moment, because this really demonstrates Roberts' cunning. Evipan is a fast-acting anesthetic that produces instant unconsciousness. It's often used medically, but it is highly dangerous when combined with barbiturates.
And Lorrimer, due to her chronic illness, was already taking a steady supply of barbiturates to manage her pain. Roberts exploited his professional medical knowledge. By injecting the Evipan, he accelerated her death and made the overdose look completely plausible, as if she had simply taken too many of the sleeping pills she already required.
It confirmed the staged suicide, and, most importantly for Roberts, it solved the Shaitana case, permanently closing the book on all 4 of his prior murders. He was covering his tracks with audacity and medical precision.
The motive for the second murder was purely opportunistic and self-preserving. Roberts realized the police were closing in on his past, the Craddock murders, and Lorrimer's false confession provided the perfect scapegoat. He's the ultimate gambler, making a high-risk, bold play to solve multiple catastrophic problems at once.
So Poirot, knowing Roberts would now be desperate to cover his tracks, he set the final theatrical trap. He used Battle's phone, ensured Roberts was still accessible at his flat, and brought in his final unexpected witness.
The ultimate unmasking utilized an actor named Gerald Hemingway, disguised as a window cleaner. Hemingway was instructed to pretend to have seen Roberts inject Mrs. Lorrimer as she lay in bed.
And when confronted not just with the accusation, but with the mention of the injection and the specific obscure chemical name, Evipan, and finally the mention of the Craddocks, Roberts' nerve broke. He immediately collapsed, saying the simple words of a losing gambler, "I throw in my hand."
Aha!
Roberts, the boldest bluffer of them all, finally lost his nerve when confronted with the precision of Poirot's psychological and medical deduction. So after all the twists, the false confessions, the eliminations, and the process of connecting personality back to method, we can state the final, irrefutable findings of this deep dive.
The true killer of Mr. Shaitana was, definitively, Dr. Roberts. The murder was committed out of sheer, bold, audacious bluff and panic when Shaitana's pointed comments during dinner convinced Roberts that he was known, identified, and about to be exposed. He seized the opportunistic stiletto, striking quickly when he was dummy at the bridge table, relying on the high-risk gamble that no one would notice.
The final tally of this bizarre case is chilling. Dr. Roberts is responsible for 4 murders: Mr. Craddock, Mrs. Craddock, Mr. Shaitana, and Mrs. Lorrimer. Anne Meredith is responsible for 1, Mrs. Benson. Major Despard and Mrs. Lorrimer were innocent of the Shaitana murder, and Despard was entirely innocent of the shooting Shaitana suspected him of.
The case brilliantly validates Poirot's central hypothesis about criminal patterns. When Battle expressed confusion and disappointment that the crimes had no points of material similarity poison, anthrax, stabbing Poirot corrected him, arguing that the similarity was profound, but purely psychological.
Yes, he made that crucial statement. The 2 murders attributed to Dr. Roberts proved to be almost exactly the same. They, too, had been what I might describe as public murders.
Roberts' killings were always open, requiring extraordinary nerve and bluff. Infecting the shaving brush while openly washing his hands, poisoning under cover of a professional inoculation, and finally, stabbing a man in a room full of intensely focused people. Every action was an expression of his arrogant, risk-taking psychological profile. He is, as Poirot says, an unoriginal animal whose nature dictates his method, even if the physical weapon changes.
The consistent element is the audacity required to execute the crime in plain sight.
And it's the same for the other revealed killer, Anne Meredith. She also adhered to her pattern. The timid girl who kills only out of desperate, overwhelming fear of exposure, using a domestic context and the pre-existing carelessness of others to stage an accidental death.
And that pattern continued even after the Shaitana case was solved. The sources revealed that Anne Meredith, still terrified of exposure, died by drowning while attempting to murder Rhoda Dawes, who knew Anne's secret regarding the death of Mrs. Benson and threatened to tell Battle. It was her final panicked act of elimination, a last attempt to use an accident, this time drowning, to protect herself.
Fortunately, Major Despard, the cleared man of honor, saves Rhoda. The two find common ground in their shared adventurous spirit, solidifying the failure of the timid Anne to ever successfully integrate or escape the psychological trap of her own nature. The deduction based on personality profiles triumphs entirely over the circumstantial evidence.
The power of pattern is the ultimate takeaway here, and it's a terrifying thought about human behavior. The successful killer, Roberts, sought security by replicating his old pattern, using a calculated public environment to hide a medical crone. The failed killer, Anne Meredith, sought security by replicating her pattern, using domestic context for accidental death.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Shaitana's morbid collection resulted in his own death, the ultimate price for his arrogance. But since the criminal mind relies so fundamentally on repetition and pattern to succeed, does the successful capture of a pattern killer like Roberts, based entirely on psychological profiling derived from a game of cards, not, in a perverse way, validate Shaitana's dangerous hobby as a legitimate, if deeply unethical way to predict human behavior?
If you can profile the killer based on how they play bridge, perhaps Shaitana was simply an early, if ultimately doomed, behavioral profiler. A dangerous thought indeed for you to mull over. You now know everything you need to know about reading the cards on the table. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.